meeting of the Lake Forest City Council Finance Committee. Could we please have the roll called?
Mayor Schoenheider?
Here.
Chairman Paneleon?
Here.
Alderman Novit?
Here.
Alderman Waldeck?
Here.
Alderman Moore?
Here.
Alderman Reisenberg?
Here.
Alderman Tack? Alderman Palmer?
Here.
Alderman Edelman?
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. The second item on our agenda after the roll call is consideration of minutes from the Finance Committee meeting held on December 12th, 2013. Are there any comments or edits necessary? I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Third item on the agenda is core and elective service analysis for the fiscal year 2015 budget. This is a discussion item. It's going to be presented by Elizabeth Hollab, the Director of Finance.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman Paneleon. As a fiscal year 15 budget discussion item, this item is on your agenda for discussion this evening. Included in your packet is the proposed core and elective service analysis for 2014, which would be incorporated as part of the fiscal year 15 budget document. The document as included in your packet is included in red line mode so that you can clearly see the proposed revisions from the 2013 list that was incorporated in the fiscal year 14 document. This is presented by department and lists the services provided by each department, so you can see the proposed revisions proposed by department. Just entertain any questions that the committee may have. Otherwise, it will be presented for your discussion and approval this evening as part of the fiscal year 15 budget process.
Questions or comments?
Well, I just would like to note, and particularly in the police department, a lot of things that were previously core, such as dispatch, now have been eliminated. And that, I think, may well be correct, but the question is, how do we go about saying something is core, and then instead of saying it's elective, just say, no, we don't need it at all? And then what about the issue of not core within a department, but core within the city? I mean, I have always said I think the city's what it owes its citizens: police, fire, sanitation, administration, water, sewage. So the senior center in Croya, things like that, Eloa Farms, by definition are elective in my mind. In other words, you know, when you get down to really the crunch of what is running a city all about, those things are nice, but almost by nature they're elective. You know, if you have to start cutting things, are you going to cut your police department before you cut the senior center or Croya? So again, it seems to be a discussion within a department when you say something is core. But again, I don't know if the other aldermen share my view, but there are some departments and services in the city that I think are core, and perhaps we should designate them as core and recognize that the other ones are elective. They're nice to have, and maybe some of the things within them are core, but the thing itself is elective. I don't know, I just wanted to throw that up for discussion.
I understand what you're saying, and I looked over the list and had similar feeling of if we get rid of it, well, I guess it's taken away as we would with crossing guards for the police department if we chose not to provide them. Dispatching, though, we're providing for. It's not a service that we're eliminating. We recognize it's a service that has to be provided in some form by the city. So again, playing with the word core, it's not eliminated, it's just being taken care of in a different manner, potentially, if we go that direction.
Can I make a?
I think it's a mistake on the typewriter.
I think, yeah, when you do a
Not
red
getting rid
line,
of 27 officers.
when you do a red line, you move something, it shows up as a deletion and an insertion elsewhere. And I think if you look at page 19, it's all there, and then on page 20, where it was moved from, it's all deleted. So it's all still there.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point,
But-
good point.
But I think that,
Expanding, and I share Bob's thoughts, but going a little further and maybe tangential, There's certain things like in the recreation department where providing programs is fine, but in some of these areas, there's a duplication of services, and maybe that's what we should be examining. For instance, maybe some of the programs at Gorton are the same as at the recreation department. Maybe there's some buildings where we could narrow down the buildings between maybe Gorton, the recreation center, and the senior center, combine those. So what's listed here, I agree, is acceptable, but I think we want to examine where we're duplicating services, could outsource the services for the future, and again, cut back some of our costs. So I understand what you're saying, but again, it's up for further discussion.
I view this analysis as looking at functions within a function, not necessarily the function itself. For instance, police and fire win out over recreation. Because as Bob said, those are core functions. The same way in a business, production and sales and marketing generally rule out over human resources. But this analysis, to me, was an analysis of the functions within the function, which I think is okay, And quite frankly, I don't think we need to beat ourselves to death over this issue.
I had a question in IT. I didn't understand when it said city website hosting. Does that mean that someone else is hosting it, or we're not having we just got a new website, right?
Right. When we contracted with American Eagle for website, they are now hosting the website rather than the
So that's
city.
why it's been removed?
Exactly.
Okay. That's what I thought, so.
Thank you.
But the provision of the website is still a core function. I think that's one of the things that maybe we're talking about here a bit, is what's this about? Is this about what are we trying to deliver, or is it about what's our method of delivery?
Right.
So, this is not really about method, this is about what, right?
This, the purpose of this function or this exercise is to have this kind of a conversation about what are the most important services that we can provide our residents. Sort of a 30,000-foot perspective on what should we be focusing on. And I think importantly, you're absolutely correct, Alderman Pantaleon, this is not about who's going to provide the service. We just decide, is this a core service that we should provide or not, number one. And then number two is it tries to, as Alderman Reisenberg just said, within a department, we recognize that not everything is core. Not everything has to be done. And so as you get into the process of having to cut back, which is really where we've been the last 5 or 7 years, what services within those core areas or functional areas should we continue to allocate resources to or should not be? And so what this really helps us do is identify the council and the community's priorities, so as we are looking at our budgets coming up here very shortly, that we can say if we have to cut, these are the areas that we should be looking at cutting. Is that?
I personally, I understand exactly what you're saying, but looking at police, which is kind of the poster child for what we're doing here, it's very hard to follow. You have, as Alderman Pantaleon pointed out, you have one page where everything is crossed out, another page where it seems to magically reappear, but it's quite not quite the same. So it would help me certainly to understand what we're doing, to have kind of a summary of, okay, here's what's left, here's what we're doing. We're dropping one person from this service, or we're considering outsourcing this service, because trying to put it side by side, I suppose you could figure it out, but it's a lot of work. And it would be, I think, easier to understand if you just said, here's what we're trying to do with the police department as far as staffing, and here's what's going to show up in the services, core versus elective. So I'd like a chance to see that before I take a position on this.
And Alderman, that information you're going to see at the March 10th budget meeting, where we really start to drill down on what is the real impact on the service levels and so forth.
Further observations about the core versus elective analysis? Okay. That was a discussion item. No action is required specifically. So if it pleases the committee, I will move on to the next item. The next item 4 is the water rate structure and fiscal year 2015 water rate recommendation. This is a fiscal year 15 budget discussion item. This is based on the work of a subcommittee that, of the Public Works Committee, and Elizabeth Hollab is going to present their recommendations.
Okay, good evening. This is continuing discussions that we've had at previous Finance Committee meetings, but at the December meeting, the Finance Committee referred this matter to the Public Works Committee, which met last week, to really vet the various options and scenarios that the city could pursue with the water rate structure. So this evening, I just have a brief PowerPoint to go through and summarize for you the recommendation that the Public Works Committee came to last week at their meeting. First, this is a graph I think that you saw at the council meeting or the Committee of the Whole meeting earlier this month, but this somewhat demonstrates the real impact of the usage of water on the plant. This shows a 5-year average developed by Public Works of pumpage at the plant by month. And it shows the 5-year average by month, January, February, March, April. And then you can see that beginning in May, that average pumpage begins to ramp up, with the real impact being in July and August. And then it begins to trail off and goes back down, with October, November, December returning to the similar levels of January through April. So it really demonstrates that the plant sees a significant increase in pumpage through the summer months, based mostly on recreational water consumption during the summer. This chart shows that based on billing records, we took water consumption by quarter and by class of consumer for the year ended September 30th, 2013. We broke the consumption down into quarters. So we looked, you can see by column, the quarter for October 1 through December 31 of 12, the first quarter of 13, the second quarter of 13, and the third quarter of 13. And you can see by category, churches, commercial, multifamily, schools, and residential, the total accounts that the city has in that category. And then by account, the number of accounts in that quarter, consumption exceeded 60,000 gallons for that quarter. And you can see in churches, commercial, multifamily, and schools, the consumption stays relatively constant throughout the year. And you can see that for the subtotal of those 4 classes, 52%, 46%, 56%, 58% of those total accounts, consumption exceeded 60,000 gallons for the quarter of those total accounts in each quarter. However, in residential, which makes up the vast majority of the counts of the city, you can see a dramatic change by quarter. In the fourth quarter of 12, only 4% exceeded 60,000, 2% in the first quarter of 13, 12% in the second quarter, but in the third quarter, 28%. So you can see that the residential category has a dramatic change in the summer months and is, and it demonstrates is really impacting much of that usage and change in consumption on the plant during the year or during the summer months. What this caused was a question by staff that we talked about at the Public Works Committee meeting as to whether the city should consider a rate for residential consumers that is different from other customer classes simply because their consumption and usage of water is different from other customer classes. So that was a policy question that we talked about and we'll come back to when we talk about the recommendation. So at the Public Works Committee, we vetted a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different options. But at its January 13th meeting, the Public Works Committee made the following recommendations. They recommended an increase in the fixed rate charge effective May 1st, 2014. And for residential customers, so separating them different from the other 4 customer categories, a consumption charge per 1,000 gallons effective May 1st, 2014, a first-tier consumption charge to 60,000 gallons per quarter of $5.14, which is same as the current rate, so no change in the current rate for the first 60,000 gallons per quarter, but a second-tier consumption charge for usage over 60,000 gallons in a particular quarter of $5.40, which is a 5% premium over the base rate. For all other customers, so other categories of customers, a consumption charge per 1,000 gallons effective May 1st, 2014 of $5.30, which is a 3% increase over the current rate of $5.14 for all usage. And they would just be billed flat for all consumption that they used with no tier consumption charge. It was further recommended by the Public Works Committee that the city implement a hardship abatement program for residents unable to afford the increase in the water rate, with the threshold to be determined. And during fiscal year 2015, that further review of the water rate structure be done to more thoroughly review for potential changes in future years. And also during fiscal year 2015, for staff to research and develop an incentive program to promote updates and upgrades to existing sprinkler systems in the city to foster conservation through means other than rates. The concern of the Public Works Committee is that they felt, and I would let the Public Works Committee speak for themselves as well, is that they feel that means other than rates could be more effective in dealing with conservation, and that if we instead look to incentivize other conservation programs such as promotion of upgrades to sprinkler systems, that we could perhaps accomplish more in conserving usage than imposing tiered rates or a rate structure that would promote conservation. So that's a summary. The next slide demonstrates this a little bit from a numerical perspective. We first looked at the top. This is a grid that shows the considerations that we looked at in the fall of last year as being 4 primary considerations when evaluating a rate structure. And we looked at whether or not the different recommendations would achieve these considerations when we looked at the different scenarios. The Public Works Committee recommendation would achieve all 4, in that the recommendation of adjusting the fixed rate would increase revenue stability, so it would accomplish assisting in minimizing the weather fluctuations. It would promote water conservation because it would have that second tier effect of being an incentive to conserve water. Equity was another consideration, in that this is a consumer perception issue, in that the studies have shown that consumers tend to perceive a variable rate to be more equitable than a fixed rate, so adjusting the variable rate would accomplish that consideration. And it would accomplish cost recovery, in that we would continue to maintain the 5-year forecast and the stability of the water fund, which is solely independent. We don't subsidize that through other means or tax subsidies from the general fund. So the specific recommendation on the fixed rate was to increase the quarterly charge from 20 to 25, 100 to 125, and 500 to 625 per quarter. And then the variable rate for the first tier remains at $5.14, second tier 5% premium to $5.40 for usage over 60,000 gallons per quarter. All other customers in the city, a variable rate 3% increase to $5.30 per 1,000 gallons. The estimated annual revenue increase based on consumption the 12 months ended September 13 would be $255,639. We talked about the fact that to meet our 2.5% revenue growth estimate in our 5-year forecast, we were trying to accomplish $146,000. So that was our target to meet our growth estimate in our 5-year forecast. So this would allow $110,000 approximately in additional funding per year for CIP funding. And then what we did below is we looked under each scenario at a customer impact analysis. We looked at 4 different types of customers in our customer base. We looked at a low usage residential customer, a medium usage residential customer, a high usage residential customer, and a sample commercial. This is a commercial user that has very high usage every quarter. Now, obviously, we would have commercial users that have a wide range of consumption. This is a commercial customer that has a very high water usage year-round. We compared their fiscal year 14 projected water and sewer costs, and then what their fiscal year 15 would be under the new rate recommendations based on the same usage. And you can see what their 14 and 15 costs would be, what their dollar increase would be, and their percentage increase would be. And then we just noted, of course, that with the sanitation fee, the residential customers will also see a $96 annual impact with the $8 per month sanitation fee added to the water bill. And finally, this tries to summarize based on usage ended September 30th, 2013. It looks solely at the residential customers, what the annualized dollar impact would be of the second tier rate. And the proposed second tier rate would have the following annual impact on residential customers based, of course, on their consumption ended September 2013. And this does not look at the fixed cost adjustment. It's only looking at the effect of the second tier premium rate. So of the 6,466 residential customers, 71% of them, so 4,589 accounts, would not be impacted because in that year, they had no quarters where they were over 60,000 gallons in the quarter. So we're projecting that 71%, so 4,589 accounts, would not see any impact of the second tier rate at all, provided the year's usage would stay the same as that year. 1,133 accounts, so another 18% would see an impact of less than $20 per year. And then you can see the rest, how their impacts would fall annualized. 370 accounts would see an impact of 20 to 40 per year, and so on. Now, I would note that the year ended September 30th, 2013 was a fairly low consumption year. So I just want to be fair and reasonable in stating that, because the summer of 2013 was a fairly wet and cool summer. So that could be higher, obviously, in a very hot, dry summer. But that was the most recent and most current data that we had, and so we used that year's data to generate these projections. We looked also at, we talked about at the Public Works Committee, this desire to impact the proportion of fixed versus variable revenue in the system. Right now, the city is about, the water fund is about 13% fixed, with the remainder being variable revenue. Obviously, the more variable revenue you have in the utility, the more fluctuation you're going to have from year to year based on weather. So you can see that in the past, the fiscal year 11 through 13 actual revenue Your yellow is staying very constant. That's a fixed rate revenue. That's the monthly and quarterly fixed rate charges. The blue is the variable rate revenue. You can see how that has fluctuated from year to year based on revenue. Fiscal year 14 is the budgeted, and then the fiscal year 15 is the projected based on the recommended rate and the 5-year average consumption. So we budget based on 5-year average water consumption. So that's where we would budget in 15 based on the recommended rate by the Public Works Committee. Because of the increased fixed rate recommended by the Public Works Committee, that would move the fixed rate proportion from 13.1 to 14.4, so it would begin to increase the fixed rate proportion to the total, which is positive, but you can see it has a very small impact overall to the overall system. So we talked a little bit about whether or not the city should move to make a bigger adjustment between fixed and variable, and that was part of the discussion that the Public Works Committee was recommending that the city continue to have over the next year as to what that percentage really should be optimally for the system. And then what we've added to this chart, based on a conversation that we had at the meeting last week, is the green bar and the red line on this chart. The green is annual revenue based on winter quarter consumption. So we took the winter quarter, which is the lowest consumption quarter we have for the system. So we took the winter quarter for the year ended September 13 and annualized that. That's $4 million in annual revenue. So that's really a worst case scenario of what your annual revenue would be for the system. And the red line is the annual revenue based on the average quarterly consumption for the year ended September 13th. So we just used the average of the 4 quarters, and that was just a little over 6 million. So just to give you a baseline for the minimum and for the average. So Alderman Novitt, I don't know if I missed anything or if you would like to add anything from the Public Works Committee meeting last week.
No, I think you basically described everything that was agreed on. And yeah, the input of Alderman Waldeck and Tack basically carried the ball. I think I said 2 words at the entire meeting. But I think it creates incentives for conservation. It achieves the goal of the increased revenue. I think everything that we wanted is there. Are there any questions from the council?
I have one. I'm actually, with all due respect, I'm quite shocked.
Okay.
Because what I thought the council talked about before it went to Public Works as it was presented was something more than a 15 cent per thousand. This was going to be we spoke to the issue of the rising number of sprinkler systems and how that was going to eventually water bankrupt, or whatever that word would be, our water system. And if we didn't charge dramatically more for the people that ran their sprinklers during a rainstorm, during in the middle of a drought when we didn't have any water, I guess that didn't make sense, but if we didn't do something dramatic in that regard, there would be no incentive. And just a little bit of math here, but it looks like only, what do we say, we have 1,800 sprinkler systems out of a little bit less?
Be 1,500, but it'll increase.
So only 3.4% of our residents will pay $50 or more per year. And to me, my neighbors who want to water their lawn say, charge me double, I want a lawn. These people have put in $5,000 to $10,000 sprinkler systems. They're making the demand on the system is shutting down the city from someone who doesn't have a sprinkler system watering on a day when the trees are starving and possibly not using water. We've come close to boiling on a couple of instances. It's closer than we want to come, I should say. And I think that going from 514 to 540 per thousand over, while it might meet our financial goals, which is kudos to us, I think it it does nothing for conservation and doesn't reflect what the council spoke about before the Public Works Committee meeting. And I, with all due respect, I just think that wasn't what I left feeling the impact was going to be on the water rate changes that led to conservation. And will this do anything to slow sprinkler? The big problem was our water plant can't handle it, and 500 more sprinkler systems, and we're shut down. And we're on the way to go there because everybody's putting them in. And what does this do? This was going to be one of the major pieces of curbing that. So I'm just surprised at what I heard, that's all.
I don't want to hitchhike on that, but I want to, also, I'm confused. Because I didn't hear what, this is, the last time we talked about this was in the December council meeting. And I thought we agreed that the issue was, how are we going to cover our additional capital costs? And I thought we concluded that we were going to do that by raising our fixed costs. I thought we also said that this variable thing is very confusing, and everybody seems to have a very different idea on it, and we don't really know what to do. So, and besides that, it's very controversial. I remember, apparently we did it years ago before I was on council, and there was a lot of pushback, and we might have even rolled it back. So I thought the conclusion was we were going to do nothing with the variable other than continue to look at it and then probably do something in 2015, and that we were only going to increase the fixed cost because we certainly had to cover our additional capital costs, and the best way to do that would be to spread it across all of the citizens.
At Public Works Committee, we did look at the scenario of just impacting the fixed cost. Fixed cost will disproportionately, in fact, impact the low usage residential. And if you want to incentivize those who are really impacting the system in the summer, you are actually benefiting them. And you are inversely impacting negatively the people who use less water. And I think I don't want to speak for the Public Works Committee, I felt that they were concerned about that approach.
Let me push back a little bit on that.
Okay.
I thought we said that everybody uses water, and that if you you have to need new capital to invest into the system, that it should be spread across all people that use the water. So that's why we decided we were going to do the fixed cost. This whole thing about incenting people or incentivizing people, however, whatever the doggone word is a whole separate issue that is a function of variable costs. And again, it was way too confusing. We didn't really want pushback. We thought we would just do the fixed because it was clearly defensible. And if we did both at the same time, there would be possibly residential pushback. And
I think we
that
need to go watch the
it might
meeting.
ruin, it might cause us to throw the whole thing into back in our face. That's what I thought the agreement was. And to me, all the heads were nodding. And so David is shocked for a different reason than I am. I came back and looked
It looks
at
like
this
we
and
started
went,
over.
whoa,
Well, let me jump in, because I think what you're reflecting here is the fact that you had multiple and conflicting goals, and each of you,
Yes.
and some of you had different ones. And so I think really what the Public Works Committee was wrestling with was to try and address those conflicting and multiple goals and objectives that you did have. I think, Alderman Reisenberg, one of the things that was discussed at length at the Public Works Committee is to address the issue that you had, but I think for the reasons that Elizabeth mentioned, we didn't want to ratchet up the fixed costs too quickly because those people who are, you know, on the lower end of the economic scales in Lake Forest, or the empty nesters, or the snowbirds and so forth, they would significantly be disproportioned, and they're not what's really causing the problem in the system. If you go back, and I don't know if we have a slide here, the other challenge we have is we're trying to reduce, to Alderman Moore's point, we're trying to reduce some usage for about 15 days of the year that exceed our capacity. But we don't want to push it down too far because we still want to sell the water. So it's a balancing act, and what I think the staff recommended to the Public Works Committee is, let's put this structure in place that now gives the City Council going forward, and part of the reason that there would be ongoing conversations throughout 2014 is to look at these different mechanisms that are now in place in your water rates to either generate more money for capital, to incentivize people to continue to conserve. You have those options, but we're really, I think, leery about doing any one of those too dramatically, too quickly, right off the bat.
And just, David, to just address one aspect of what you were saying, I think one of the things that we talked about, and this was really more, and I don't want to misquote you, but I think this is really more, Randy's came from Randy more so than me, is this is debt that we all incurred. We all incurred this debt equally. The people who water more, or who use more water, who, you know, they're not more responsible for that debt than my neighbor, my 92-year-old neighbor who lives across the street and has a little tiny, well, on the size of a postage stamp. So we all incurred this debt equally, and so the idea of raising the fixed costs, it just kind of spoke to fairness, to be honest with you. We just, that's what kind of swayed me in terms of increasing the fixed costs for everyone for a debt that we're all equally responsible for.
But there's fixed cost and there's variable cost. And I thought we were talking just about how do we cover the, what you call it, Elizabeth, CIP? The additional CIP cost?
Yeah, well, one
And
thing.
that was a function of how do you.
Contribution to a fund is what that is.
Yeah, so that's a function of raising your fixed rate. The whole incentivizing thing, or incenting people, and maybe charging people that use more than other people that use less, is a function of your variable cost. And I just thought that we were going to put that off, the latter piece, the variable piece, until 2015. We were just going to deal with the fixed costs this year.
Well, I'm not really comfortable without solving the problem, which is that we run out of water. And we run out of water, according to what I've heard, because we planned on 500 sprinkler systems and we got 1,500 sprinkler systems. And it's during that period of watering that we run out of water. Because more people are watering their lawns that don't have sprinkler systems, and everyone who does continues to use them, and they need more in that period. And we're more interested in our landscaping than we used to be. Maybe all those are factors. Maybe we're planting succulents instead of deep-rooted prairie plants or something. So the trends have changed. If we don't reverse the trends, we have to expand the water plant. If we have to expand the water plant, we need this much money. So we either have to charge for water to accommodate that additional expense, which is a tad more than $110,000 to CIP, right? I mean, it's millions of dollars. But what we've done here only fixes the shortfall to finance. And it does it in a very pleasant way, congratulations, but it doesn't address what I thought we were going after, and I guess Alderman Reisenberg thought we were going to hold off on, the problem of running into the brick wall eventually on water. Our books will balance, but we won't have any water. So
And you think that charging the people who, those few people, that small percentage, who use way too much water.
Or
You think
using-
that by charging them twice as much, 3 times as much, 10 times as much.
2 or 3 times as much.
You think that that's going to make them say, oh,
I think
wow,
they'll
I
use
better
less
not."
water, and I think those
Then
who
I-
want to do it, but my
I
my
don't,
point, I'm
but-
not going to there. I think that if, I would be comfortable, and with all, I know that Public Works has come up with a recommendation. I don't think that we have an understood common goal for water rates. And I would like to at least get to that point, because I think it's to deter the increased use of water. Alderman Reisenberg thinks it's something else. The methods are being discussed at the same time. And I left quite confident, understanding I knew what the purpose of the water rate discussion was going to lead to. And to your point, Bob, you know, we're not disagreeing with each other. We're talking about different things.
Right. Well, and I guess, and I
I'm
don't
not
want to,
comfortable with going in this direction.
and I don't want to speak for the Public Works Committee, but let me address 2 points. And first is to Alderman Reisenberg's point. And this was, I think, a misnomer, if you will, or maybe a mislabeling of the term. But if you look at the chart that's up there right now, the yellow, while it is defined as fixed, really doesn't just cover your fixed costs. And that's one of the reasons that we've included the green line and the red line there, because some of the variable rate also is allocated towards fixed costs. One of the things that we talked about at the committee, but clearly we didn't feel that we were in a position to recommend it that evening, is analyzing where as a policy we want that yellow line to go. It's moving from 13.1 to 14.4, but should over a period of time it go to 20? Should it go to 25? And that's a fiscal policy that the council can wrestle with over the course of the year, but clearly the variable rate also does address the point that you were making, Alderman Reisenberg. And Alderman Moore, with respect to, I think, the discussion on the conservation, nobody said that isn't what we were trying to accomplish. I think there was a debate as to...
No, there was. There's actually a slider that says we've accomplished it.
Right, but I think that the goal here is, and I don't want to speak for Alderman Tack, but the analogy was raising the price of cigarettes has not necessarily reduced the number of people who smoke. And so while raising rates is an important function for trying to influence people, some of the things that we also really talked about is if we could get those 1,500 sprinkling systems to operate more efficiently, that might do it as well. And so, you know, let's look in 2014 as sort of an incentive program that how can we get some of those people who have old antiquated sprinkling systems to update them, because you can update them where they'll be much more efficient and they will address the problem. We're also going to be coming back to you on March 3rd. Mike Thomas will be here with a presentation about our annual sprinkling ordinance requirement and really getting more education out there early on about how to be responsible and not wait till we have a problem in July.
I don't mind carrot or stick. I just think that it didn't address, I felt, from my memory, I didn't review the meeting, that we left the meeting with a different set of expectations.
Right. And I think
And obviously, we all felt that way because we agreed that we both were surprised for different reasons. but-
right.
Well, and there's probably a couple of other opinions on this
Yeah.
on the council.
No matter what we do, it doesn't rule out the possibility that we have to expand the capacity of production at the water filtration plant, which will take money, however you want to generate it, off the fixed or off the variable. But raise the variable, raise the fixed, we still may run out of water and have to increase capacity. So I think that has to be addressed as well.
And does the water pay for that or another bond, right?
I don't know.
Am I correct that there's a sliding scale for the fixed charges? It looks like there are 3 different scales here,
Yes.
20 to 25, 100 to 125, and
Depending upon the size.
Right. What we currently do is we have a small, medium, and large customer defined, and it depends on the meter size. And so we're keeping those classes the same. And so the small customers currently pay $20 per quarter, and it's proposed that they go from 20 to 25. The medium customers would go from 100 to 125, and the large customers would go from 500 to 625 per quarter.
how much more does that bring in
This proposed change in fixed rates would generate $160,000 per year.
Okay. And do we have any idea what it costs just to service the pipes that are in the ground? I mean, we're talking about capacity of the water plant, but the fact is we have a system, and if somebody hooks up to the system, they're hooking up to a grid that has to be maintained, has to be updated every so often. And I thought one of the things we did look at was trying to get an idea, well, how much does just keeping the system maintained in the ground, even if nobody uses any water?
Right.
Can we break that cost out and say that should be covered at the very least by the fixed?
Right.
Because, you know, if you hook it up, all of a sudden you become an obligation of the city, you know, to maintain the service up to your pipes and all that.
Right. We do have the budget broken out in various components, and the question we talked about last week at Public Works Committee was determining which component would cover, you know, which component of the budget should fixed costs cover, and determining what that would be. Is it debt? Is it capital? Is it some portion of the operating budget that would not change regardless of the amount of water that was produced? We didn't get to an answer there, but it is a policy question that is worth answering. But we did talk about the fact that there is a portion of those fixed costs that are covered by variable revenue. And we did mention that another concept is even considering, as part of the discussions that we have in the coming year, is if you want that yellow line to move more quickly, you can adjust the fixed rate and lower the variable rate at the same time. And you can move that yellow line very quickly. And you can just adjust your fixed rate and lower your variable rate at the same time, which equalizes the impact on the customer, but changes dramatically that yellow line very quickly.
I just think it's a matter of fairness on the fixed costs to
Right.
have it a per capita. If you have a house or you have a service, you're going to pay a fair share of a certain amount. Now, that doesn't necessarily include increasing the capacity of the plant, increasing the operating hours of the plant, but I would think we could come to a figure
Right.
of here's what it costs if we don't push any water through our system.
Right.
Here's what it costs basically for that part of the plant, and we'll divide that up per capita, even if it's on a sliding scale per capita,
Sure.
that would be fair. Now, the variable, I think, you know, serves a purpose, because if we are using more water, we're gonna need more revenue. I think you know, the disincentivizing it's a worthy goal, and the getting more money in because we're gonna have to, you know, increase capacity is also reasonable. But I think it's a balancing between the two. And again, with fixed costs, I think the idea of fixed cost is that if you hook up to our system and just keeping the system there, regardless of capacity, I would like to see that kind of broken out as a figure, and that be the discussion of what the fixed cost should be. So,
Okay.
Well, we're running out of time here, so, and I don't know that we're going to reach a resolution. We've got our budget meeting coming up, at which this will be decided on in March. Is that fair to say? No?
Actually, we're hoping to bring this to you for first and second reading in February because of the programming changes we have to make in the system.
Okay. Well, we're not here to vote, so.
No, we were hoping to get a reaction from the committee, so that we would know how to bring first reading back on the 3rd.
I mean, I guess if I had to characterize what I'm hearing, listening to this, I think there seems to be at least a group of people, I don't know, I mean, without taking a vote, it's hard to say, but it seems that we're reasonably divided in the sense that, but if there was to be an increase in the fixed component, it sounds to me like it would be well-received by a significant number of people. I don't know whether it would be a majority, but certainly maybe a plurality.
Of more than what's recommended by the Public Works Committee.
I guess speaking for myself for a moment, because I've been holding my tongue, this strikes me as a very weak compromise. We're kind of waving our arms at it. We're not really doing very much. to recharacterize the quality of the revenue stream. It's not getting better, it's just pretty much staying the same, and we're doing a little of this and a little of that, but not too much of anything to generate much opposition. And I do think there was a consensus, well, maybe not a consensus, a plurality, that we needed to do better at the quality of the revenue stream and at covering our fixed costs, as Alderman Palmer said. And I happen to agree with that. I think when it's sort of like, you're in the water club. You live here, and this plant is here, and it has to be maintained, and some component of that is just a fixed cost and a fixed benefit that we all get, sort of like our electricity being delivered to our house. Then from there, how much you use is another matter. I also think it's interesting that there are these other ways, and the price incentive is a big deal, and we all know that in the long run it seems to work. But when you look at these customers, this particular group of customers, and this total cash cost to them, nobody's here complaining about not being able to sprinkle their lawn because it's going to cost them too much. I mean, we've had no comment from the public about that. So I do suspect that the incentive effect here may be less than what we might think. Doesn't mean we shouldn't take advantage of using it to get more revenue, but I think we shouldn't think that this is going to change behavior that much.
George, I agree with a lot of your analysis, but here's the problem that I have. If you raise the fixed costs too much, and I agree with everything you said about the fixed cost, but if you raise it too much, you're hurting the people who can afford it the least, and that's just not fair. You're hurting my little 92-year-old neighbor who, is barely has a lawn to sprinkle, and I mean, she's the one who can least afford it.
But they're not
And
sprinkling their lawns, they're drinking the water, they're flushing their toilets.
I understand that, but I just think if you raise the fixed costs too much, that you are really placing the heaviest burden on those who can afford it the least.
Do you think that this
That's the
raises
problem I
that to
have.
that level, that these
Not-
people are going to have their actual cost of water go up as a result of this?
I don't think what we came up with
I don't think you're anywhere
raises it.
close to that.
No, not at all, but if
That's
you
my
raise
point.
it more, then,
They're still consuming, when you change the fixed variable, that group of people is still, you're not meeting their current threshold.
well,
You're just changing the
I
character
agree,
of the
that's why I
revenue.
thought that this was a good idea. What we came up with was a good idea.
From an
But I
accounting
think if you-
standpoint,
But you're
fixed
not-
is an
you're-
appropriate amount. It covers fixed costs.
Okay. I think we need to
Can
move
I,
on.
yeah, Alderman Penna, in the interest of time, here's what I'm gonna suggest. Everybody's got some really good ideas, and everybody's going in a little bit of different direction. What I might suggest is everyone quantify your thoughts, your ideas. I give kudos to the Public Works Committee, who spent a lot of time on this. And pass on your ideas and what you think, how or if this plan should be tweaked, to Elizabeth and to Bob and to Kent. And then give staff a little time and the Public Works Committee just a little time to kind of reconnoiter that a bit and take a look, and then we can, I'm sensitive, Elizabeth, to the time frame necessary to kind of implement any increase if there is one. So does that make sense? Could I ask everyone perhaps on the council that by no later than, let's say, Monday of next week, take a little time, feedback to Kent, to Elizabeth, and to Bob, and then we can kind of pull those together and kind of decide where we're headed, if we could do that.
And we could provide a little wider discussion.
That would be great.
Okay. I'm going to call an end to that discussion and move on to the next item with the remaining minute that we have. Item 5 is Information Technology 5-Year Capital Improvement Program. This is a fiscal year 15 discussion item as well. And Elizabeth, I think this is yours to present as well. This is a rough night for you.
This is a follow-up to the capital budget material that was presented in November. We just provided the detail to you of the information technology 5-year plan in your packet. Also, as a follow-up to the December 12th CIP work group meeting, we also included a memo that gave you a little bit more detail regarding the infrastructure report card scoring on information technology hardware and software. So you had a little better understanding of the scoring and our methodology to how we did that scoring. for this year's update. Also to give you an update on the shared services study, that's been an ongoing project we've been doing with multiple municipalities in the area that's been going on since last fall, and just give you the latest update on where that stands. But the draft 5-year technology plan is updated each year in conjunction with the executive staff. In the fall, we bring the executive staff together to just make sure that we're in touch with the needs and expectations of the various operating departments, and we have incorporated their thoughts on what technology needs and changes they anticipate in the coming 5 years. So that's just an overview, and the information was included in your packet. Joe Gabansky was here, Assistant Director of IT, if you had any questions, but in the interest of time, obviously, if you have questions or would like additional information, you can give myself or Joe a call or email us.
That probably makes the most sense to keep us somewhere on track. Next item, I think, was just flash report. If anybody had comments or observations about the flash report. State of Illinois is only 60 days past due at this point, which is a big improvement, but still not acceptable in a commercial environment that I'm used to. And that's my only observation there. The last item, or the second to last item on the agenda, is an opportunity for the public to address the Finance Committee. Are there any members of the public that would like to address the Finance Committee, knowing that there will be opportunity for public comment at the City Council meeting, which is about to start? There being none,
Before we adjourn, I just have a question. Why did we cancel the February 18th Finance Committee meeting?
Because of your March 10th budget meeting?
So we're doing that in lieu of it?
And that, also, you will be touring the Hallis Hall facility on that day.
Okay.
so that was my next announcement, but I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second by Alderman Palmer. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Finance Committee meeting is adjourned.
And we'll take a very brief break and start the council sometime shortly before 7:40.